Good, we're hitting the hour, so let's get actually ongoing. So welcome everybody, good morning, evening, nighttime, whatever afternoon it is in your location. So welcome everybody, this is the special interest group for SharePoint patterns and practices, and this is the general development CSOM PowerShell provisioning special interest group, which happens in bi-weekly, and bi-weekly within this exactly the same time we have a special interest group for SharePoint framework. And the reason why we do this is that we kind of have a slightly different always topics within this special interest group versus the SharePoint framework special interest group. So in this one, we'll concentrate more on the, let's say, site provisioning, automation, modern ways of customizing, or modifying the sites more specifically, and then on the special SharePoint framework special interest group will concentrate more and more on the extensions and web parts and actual development of those things. My name is Vesa Juvonen. I'm a senior program manager from SharePoint engineering, and I'm working in a team who's responsible of the SharePoint framework and all of the APIs and all of that stuff. So good to have everybody again on the call. Let's see how many people we're getting this time. There is quite a few ongoing other activities on the SharePoint community again today, which is a great thing because it shows how active our community is. Now, today we'll have a few random miscellaneous announcements, so a few slides which I just want to go through and walk around these things, and then we have two specific demos. So number one demo, or the first demo. Let's actually flip this, sorry, now that I'm thinking this. Paolo will go first as a site classification because Paolo actually needs to drop from this call 40 past or half past of the hour, and then I'll go next with the column formatting. I do actually personally also have another meeting which I need to run into right after this meeting, so let's see if we will take the whole hour or 50 minutes depending on how many questions and everything is happening. Now, we have other PnP core team members in the call helping on the Q&A section if I need to drop and Paolo needs to drop during the call. Now, let's actually get on going. A few slides before we go to the actual demo. So this is now 2nd of November day, so we can actually get some monthly metrics from October. Some people don't find this that interesting, and obviously some people might find them interesting. We tend to go them through whenever we get updated numbers from a monthly perspective. So now on the YouTube, we had 146,000 minutes of watch time around the random videos which I have there. We have like 220 videos roughly in YouTube. Some of those stuff are specific demos, some of their stuff is guidance videos, and all of these community calls are getting recorded as well, so you can go afterwards and check, for example, cool demos from the YouTube. So 146,000 watch time last month, and there was total views was 23,000 in YouTube, so you can divide how many minutes one view actually on average looked on a video based on that. On GitHub we had 32,000 unique visitors within, and that's average 2 weeks in the SharePoint organization, which is pretty high number as well. And it has been growing significantly within every single month. Total views in GitHub was 158,000 on average on past 2 weeks within the October month. That sounds pretty weird that it's average 2 weeks within a month, but that's because of the how actually GitHub tracks the visitors and views within the GitHub site. In the docs.microsoft.com/SharePoint/dev, we had 420,000 views. So our guidance, which has been moved from MSDN to the new location, is finding its audience, which is good. And we're looking into adding additional guidance there. Well, we are evolving that guidance on a day-to-day basis. There's new stuff actually happening there every single day. I think last time, the latest guidance went live actually yesterday, and we're doing updates on the old guidance, and we're trying to address if there's any gaps on the guidance. So please do let us know if we're missing some relevant guidance in the SharePoint dev documentation. The PnP MSDN is one of, if you're familiar with that one, it's going to be merged to the docs.microsoft.com SharePoint dev during this week. So after that, we don't have multiple locations. We only have one location to remember where the SharePoint documentation exists. On the PnP PnP reusable components usage, we broke a magical 5 billion HTTP requests in a month, and this is essentially requests, HTTP requests going through PnP PowerShell, PnP CSOM core, or PnP JavaScript core. We do not share insights around the actual SharePoint framework, but we can share insights on the PnP reusable components because they are open source and community-driven initiative. There was 7,911 unique tenants using these components, and the most active capability was again the provisioning engine, which was used in quite a lot of tenants as well. Now, a few other things which this one I apparently will keep on in every single week, and I do apologize if you've seen this one in the past as well, but we really want to make sure that people are aware of this. So AKMS SPDev docs, or docs.microsoft.com/SharePoint/dev is the new location for all of the development documentation in SharePoint. So we're moving gradually, all of the active documentation from MSDN has been already moved, and other, let's say, relevant information will be moved to docs.microsoft.com/SharePoint as well. So this is the location for the official documentation, and we keep on evolving that one in the future. We're highly interested if you find gaps, if you're finding issues, you can actually report those in the in the github.com/SharePoint organization, in the SPDev docs repository, where we actually have all of this guidance available. So you're able to even submit content fixes or suggestions on the content changes on the pages. So you are able to create pull requests. If you don't want to do that and you want to just report or maybe start a discussion that is something right or wrong, you can use the issue list for that. So super valuable for everybody. Now, the other things what I wanted to quickly pinpoint, the column formatting. We did have a demo on this one a few weeks back in one of the special interest group calls, but we haven't actually right now yet gone live with this one with first release customers, but that's going to happen super soon, so quite soon. And this is going to be really available for first release tenants first. And it actually enables a simple UI level configuration for specific columns. And this has its own JSON format, and we do know that that might be slightly complicated. We're looking into potentially have a UI designer, a kind of a HTML-based designer even in SharePoint to actually make this happen. But for time being, it is actually JSON plop, which you need to create, and then you're able to modify the rendering of a field without any customizations. Well, the customization is the JSON definition, but it's not really a customization. It's declarative customization without JavaScript. And slightly earlier today, 2 hours ago, we actually released a new GitHub repository where we are sharing our out-of-the-box samples for the custom formatters, and we are looking into having contributions here as well. So whenever we go first release, which will happen quite fast, if you're looking into doing these kind of things and you want to share your sample with the other people in the SharePoint dev community or in the dev community, you can use that GitHub repository to do so. And there's quite a few links on the page. I'm going to show this one in practice after Paolo's demo. So now that I realized that we need to flip the demos, my slides are in a slightly wrong order, so I do apologize on that. So we're not going to do this right now. We're going to give actually Paolo first time to do his demo around the site classification. So Paolo, I don't have any slides other than this one. So
okay. Okay. So here I am. Thank you, Vesa.
Yes.
Let me share my screen, and I will show you a demo about some stuff that we are going to release through PnP, and which is related to the site classification capability that we have in SharePoint Online. So let me know when you see my screen, and of course I will steal a presentation, Vesa.
Yep.
So loading, working on it.
Let's see when it actually starts. Yes. Oh, somebody
yes.
realized that.
Yeah. Yes, I have 4 hands instead of 2. Yeah. Okay. So
the sharing didn't start, at least for me.
Doesn't start. No. So let me try again. Okay.
It might be that the other you is actually taking over the internet.
Could be. I have multiple identities,
Yes.
all claim identities, by the way. So just to be
okay,
sure.
now it's loading.
Okay, now it's working. Great. So now you can see my screen. And so
not
what I
yet.
wanna,
It's at least loading for me. It's loading still.
okay.
And now I got it. Feel free to go.
Okay, cool. So what I want to share with you is a bunch of new capabilities that we are going to release through the core library in the next and upcoming master release, and which are based on the site classification capability that we already have in SharePoint Online. So whenever you create a new modern site, like for example I'm doing right now to create a team site, and let's call it SIG demo 01. As you can see here in the lower area of this panel, I can configure how sensitive is my data, how sensitive will be the data that I want to store in this site. And here I have a nice drop-down list through which I can select a classification or a policy for my site. Well, this capability is not enabled by default. So in order to enable this capability in your tenant, right now, you would have to execute a bunch of PowerShell scripting and to do some settings to define what are your categories, what are your classifications. You will have to wait for a while to have your Azure AD tenant to be ready, and then you will be able to select, while creating a new modern site, the classification for the target site that you are going to create. Moreover, you can also provide some user guidelines as a link to a URL, which can provide much more detailed information to your end users about the meaning of the various classification that you want to have in your tenant. As I said, right now, when you create a site, and let me create this one just for the sake of completeness, when you create a site, once you select the classification, you will simply be able to see in the UI of your site, like I will do right now, the classification that you selected. As you can see here in the upper left area, just under the title of my modern team site, I have HBE, which is business impact for my information, for the information that I will store in this modern team site. So this capability is really useful whenever you want to classify your content. And eventually, if you want to create custom business logics on top of this information, because maybe you want to read what is the classification of a site and you want to behave accordingly in your own custom client-side web parts or custom component that you build on top of SharePoint Online. From an IT Pro perspective and from a configuration perspective, out of the box, without any help from PnP, let me say, you would have to use a bunch of PowerShell scripting to enable such kind of capabilities. So first of all, you will have to install the Azure Active Directory beta version of the PowerShell module, the Azure AD Preview 1, because right now the graph-based endpoints, which allow you to configure this capability, are still under the beta endpoint of the Microsoft Graph. And that's why you need the beta, the preview version of the Azure AD module as well. Then you will have to connect to your target Azure AD environment, because those settings will be stored at the Azure AD level for your tenant. And then you can simply create a new Azure Active Directory setting based on an Azure Active Directory setting template. So for example, you can simply get the settings. I'm already connected to my tenant just for the sake of completeness, and you can get a template which will define the settings for unified groups creations, and here you can create a new setting object which you can configure providing the usage guideline URL page, which is whatever you like. You can define the list of classifications as a comma separated list of values. You can even define a default classification, which can be the pre-selected one out of the box when you create a new site. And once you are done, you can simply store those new settings onto the target Azure AD tenant. Of course, you can later on retrieve those information, and so you can simply get the Azure AD directory setting based on the ID or based on the name of the setting that you want to retrieve, and you can update any already existing setting setting and set it back to Azure Active Directory. And eventually you can even delete, you can remove those settings from your tenant. All these statements, all these PowerShell commands can be executed just to do proper configuration of your environment. And as I told you, usually after at least 15-20 minutes, maybe up to 1 hour, you will find your new settings available whenever you will create a new modern site. However, we think that being able to do all of these settings, to configure all of these settings using PowerShell can be really interesting and powerful. But from another perspective, it would be great to be able to do all these configuration and to set up all of these configuration settings simply using C# and CSOM and with the help of the PnP core library. That's why right now in the dev branch of the core library, we already have a few extension methods which allow you to do all of these configuration settings just using C# and CSOM. So let me show you how it works, and let me explain you how it works internally so that you can dig into the functionality from a core library perspective. So I will first of all move to a Visual Studio console application, a really easy one, through which I can show you the syntax and the extension methods that we make available. So here we have a very classic console application in which I have a reference to the NuGet package of the PnP core library. And of course, I replaced in this specific project the reference to the core library, targeting the one that we have in the dev branch of the PnP GitHub repo. Once you have the PnP core library referenced in your project, you can simply create a client context of CSOM targeting the admin site, so the admin central site of your SharePoint Online environment. You will have to provide your own credentials to be able to access the admin site. And once you have done that, you can create the tenant object of CSOM based on the admin context that you have just created. Moreover, because under the cover, the configuration of the site classification leverages the Microsoft Graph beta endpoint, you will need to have an open authorization access token, which you can create, which you can retrieve using whatever technology you like. It can be ADAL, can be MSAL, can be even custom code that you write, which uses HTTP at the low level. But whatever will be the technique that you will use, you will simply need to have an open authorization access token from Azure Active Directory. Here, for example, I have a get access token method, which will give me back the access token for my target tenant. Once you have done that, first of all, at the tenant level, we provide an enable site classification extension method, which accepts the access token to be able to talk with the Microsoft Graph, the list of classification items, which is just a list of strings. Basically, the signature of the method just want to have an IEnumerable of a string. So it can be a list of string or whatever else, as long as it implements the IEnumerable of a string. And moreover, as you can see, we have two optional arguments, which are the default classification and the usage guidelines URL if you want to provide those additional parameters. But the minimum requirements are the access token and the list of classification items. Once you have done that, you will get back pretty soon the running settings from Azure AD. But from a SharePoint Online perspective, as I told you, it will take a while to be ready and to provide you the new drop-down in the UI when you create a new site in order to be able to select the classification. You have the extension method to enable the site classification, which I already executed in my own tenant, but we also have the get site classification list method, and I can just execute this application to show you it in practice. So let me press F10, and let me show you how it works. So I will step into this guy. I will connect to my tenant object, I will get the access token. Of course, I already configured my classifications in the target tenant, so I will not enable it again, but I will move to the get site classification list method. And here I can simply get back the list of classifications that I have already configured in my tenant. Of course, we can just show them or we can play with them. For example, if I run to cursor my code here, I can create a new list. I can add a new classification, which could be top secret, for example, and I can update my site classification, still providing the access token, the classification list, which will be the new one with the top secret element, which was missing before, and still I can optionally provide the default value as well as the guidelines URL. I can update the site classification. It will take a while, and it is done. And again, when you update the list of classifications, it will still take a while, between 15 minutes and 1 hour or maybe more, to get them ready and available in SharePoint Online. So be patient, but it takes a while. On the contrary, if you make a query using the graph, you will get it back promptly, because from an Azure perspective, the new settings will be ready almost in real time. And in fact, as you can see, if I use one more time the get site classification list method, I get back the 5 classification items that I have in my list. Last but not least, of course, I can go through all of them, but I can also disable the site classification if I want. I will simply have to provide an access token, and the extension method will do the graph calls for me to remove all of the settings from the target environment. Just to give you an idea of what we do under the cover of this method, we have the tenant extensions class in the core library, in which we define a new region for site classification, and there we have all of the methods. And here we make all of the Microsoft Graph requests to enable, configure, or disable all of the site classification settings. So pretty easy. We simply decided to encapsulate all of the graph calls that the PowerShell methods do, as CMDLet do as well, in the core library in the tenant extensions class. And I think it is also interesting to dig into this class, not now maybe, but in the near future, if you want to understand how the site classification works, because you will be able to see what is needed to be done in order to configure your environment accordingly to the settings that you will provide. For example, here, if I want to get the site classification, I simply need to get through the beta endpoint of the graph the directory setting template, and to update, I simply need to get all of the settings. I will have to retrieve the settings for the group unified, as I was doing before in PowerShell, and then I will have to make a patch against the beta/settings endpoint of the Microsoft Graph, and so on, so forth. But once you have configured, once you have enabled all of these capabilities in your tenant, maybe, let me stop it and let me run the application again, maybe you want to also play with the site classification of a site that you that you already created. So, for example, let's say that I have this modern team site in which I have a low business impact classification for my site. And from a CSOM perspective, I can play with the classification of my site. Again, I need to get an access token and I need to get a client context, but this time the client context will be the one of the target site with which I want to play. And after providing my credentials, I will be able to get the site classification using this extension method, which is an extension method for the site object of CSOM, and I will simply get back, let me show you the console application. I will simply get back the classification value that I have right now in my site. At the same time, I can also set the site classification, and I will have to provide the new classification value. Of course, it has to be one of the supported values from my tenant perspective, together with the access token. To be fair, the access token is not always needed, and I will explain you pretty soon why. But if you are targeting a modern team site, you will need to have the access token while setting the new classification value. On the contrary, if you will be in a communication site, you will not need to have the access token. And once I update the classification, I will be able to read it back and see that right now the site is medium business impact. If you go back to your site and you refresh it, you will see that just for a while you will see MBE and it will revert back to LBE. Why? Because in the back end, we are going to update also the site classification of the Office 365 group that is backing our team site. And the one that rules is the Office 365 group. So it will take again a while to synchronize the classification value that we have in the Office 365 group with the value that we have in the team site. And that's why if you update the classification of a modern team site using this technique or whatever else, eventually you can also use the Microsoft Graph at the low level instead of using those extension methods, you will still have to wait for a while, 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, to see your changes applied to the target modern site. Again, let me switch back to the core library and let me show you what we do and where do we have the implementation of this new extension method. So we have a site extensions class, which is an extension class for the site object of CSOM, and the set site classification method, which of course extends the site object, will accept the classification value and optionally the access token value. So what we do is first of all to check the template, the base template of the site. And if it is a group-0, it is a modern team site. So we need to have the access token because in order to update the classification of a modern team site, we need to update the classification of the backing Office 365 group. So we will go here to the groups and we will target the group backing our site, which can be retrieved using the group ID property of any site object in CSOM. And we will make an HTTP request targeting the Microsoft Graph to update, to patch the value. As you can see, we make a patch request targeting this URL, providing the unique ID of the target group. And once the group will be updated, after a while, there will be a synchronization engine which will synchronize the classification value for the site, for the modern site. On the contrary, if we are in a site page publishing -0, which is the modern communication site, we will simply need to update the classification value of the site from a CSOM perspective and to do an execute query retry because we are in PnP and we want to use the execute query retry. The get site classification is really easy. We simply load the value of the classification property of the site and we return that value. So we think that those extension methods will be really useful if you want to play with site classification and you want to create customizations, timer jobs, or eventually client-side web parts and using just the REST level APIs to consume the classification and to set and read the classification of a site. Moreover, having the tenant level extension methods to enable, disable, or update the classification settings will make your life easier if you want to automate the setup process using a setup wizard application or something like that. I think that's all for me, Vesa. That was my demo.
Yeah, and maybe one question or two questions what people might be thinking. What about PnP PowerShell? Because if you have a look on the out-of-the-box Azure AD PowerShell, it is actually quite complex. You need to actually go to their site and copy-paste templates and everything else, use the right GUIDs and to make that happen. Using this obviously doesn't require that. So Are there plans to actually create the PnP PowerShell commandlets, which we'll be using then to cite score, which is the typical setup? And I do know the answer of this question, but I'm kind of acting as a stupid person.
The answer could be why not? I mean, of course, usually we release capabilities at the core library level, and pretty soon or right after we release the same capabilities at PnP PowerShell level. So most likely we will release this capability now in core, and maybe next month or the month after the next one, the PowerShell CMDLets as well.
Yes.
So that's the plan. Okay.
Yep. So because if you can still flip on the PowerShell side, if you have it still open, if people are looking into this PowerShell, it is actually quite complex PowerShell, and you need to use specific GUIDs for the template and all of that stuff. So having a simplified PowerShell commandlet, where you can just provide a list of things and will hide the complexity behind of the scenes, will be highly beneficial. And this is actually super hard even to find because this is not part of the SharePoint guidance. This is part of the Azure AD guidance, which is slightly confusing. Plus the fact that it's only in preview, which is.
But it will come to the PnP guidance as well pretty soon, right?
Yeah, it will come to the SharePoint, and the PnP guidance will be merged to the SharePoint guidance, so it will come to the SharePoint guidance pretty soon. So all good. Okay. Can I pass the correlation ID and get the error information using PnP? That's a random question from the iWindow. Just jumping on that, answer is no. There is no error that level of APIs in SharePoint Online. Good. So on other topics which I wanted to use today and demo today was the column formatters. So let me actually, I'm not going to go to the slides. I'm going to share my screen directly, and let me actually show a demo on that one. So the column formatters, if you're not super familiar with this, I'm going to actually show you the documentation and the open source location in a second. So let me share my screen, and somebody needs to confirm when my screen sharing is working. It is loading, and I shared a wrong screen. That's always super successful. So let me actually share another screen. It's a classic problem if you have too many screens.
Got it.
So does it say Helsinki or does it say SPDev column formatting?
Helsinki.
Okay, good. Cool. So I'm going to start actually on the GitHub side. So quickly explaining, because I do have a link on the official documentation here as well. So was it a week ago or 1.5 weeks ago? We actually released this documentation, apparently a week ago, which is around the column formatting. It is in the underneath the declarative customization in the main menu. So if you go to the SP SharePoint development documentation in docs.microsoft.com, there's a declarative customization, and then column formatting is the right location. We'll have more stuff here in the future. But we can't announce all of those details yet. Now, in here, we explain what the column formatting is all about, and it's around the fact that you can actually achieve or modify the rendering, a UI rendering of a field value without SharePoint framework, without any code, without any JavaScript, by using this JSON-based format. So essentially, there will be a new functionality available. I'll show this one in a practice, and then you are able to use our JSON-based formatting. Like in this case, I'm going to actually zoom in. Let's use this as an example, where we compare the current field value, and if it's less than 70, we will actually get add a styling entry to that field. Now, the JSON formatting is quite complex. It's pretty flexible if you have a closer look on that one. We might have a UI designer for this one at some point. That's an ongoing discussion. It's a slightly different team who's actually making this in Redmond, but well, it's a SharePoint team, but not my team, but it's a different team, but it relates on the dev story. So there's an ongoing discussion. Do we need a UI designers for make this happen? For now, it's going to be, at least in a preview phase, when that goes live pretty soon, it's going to be without a UI designer. So you can create these manually, but there's no really super helper on making things happen. Now, let's actually make this happen. So let's do a live demo on this one. But one thing what we did to help up the learning of this one is that we released earlier today, 2 hours ago actually, a new repository which is SPDef column formatting, and in here the intention is to start collecting column formatting JSON samples. So right now what we have here is basically those fellows which are already mentioned within our documentation. So there's a format number column as a data bar as an example. There's the clarification what it actually does. There's a picture, some additional details, and then there's the JSON file always on that folder, which is essentially the definition. How do we actually make that column to be rendered based on this definition. So now let's actually do this in a practice. So I'm going to move this one on my another window, and here's my example field or example list to be precise. So this is running the stuff which isn't yet available in the first release. It will be available quite soon, but it's running newer bits or newer versions, or we enabled this capability already in this tenant. So whenever this will be available in first release within your tenants, you will have then additional settings in the column settings. You're able to do format this column, and this was efforts in a day. That's actually exactly the same example which I just saw. So let me actually go there and let me go to samples, and I'm going to actually just go here and get the data bar and the data bar JSON, which is essentially saying, hey, we kind of render use a specific styling based on the percentage value of the field. I'm not going to deep dive on the JSON structure because I don't want to actually now use the time to teach you how to do this. I want to demonstrate what it actually means. So here's my field, here's the effort. I'm going to paste in that JSON definition in the format column field. I'm going to click save. That's now saved, and if I do a refresh on a page, we can actually see that the column is now being rendered in a different way. There's a good question around the column widths. For time being, that's not at least possible. I think somebody asks, it might have been you, Diana, in Twitter as well, but that's a good feedback. Maybe we should actually give that kind of a setting here as well. Now, there's another field which is assigned to, and this is persona. So we can actually, let's get a definition for that one as well. So we could do something like, let me go to the GitHub, and let's actually use not trending icon, let's use an action button. An action button to a field which can be used to add, for example, a icon in the field, or an action or clickable action in the field when we're rendering that. So let's actually go to the JSON file. Let me actually copy that. There we go, and then let me modify the field, format settings, format this column, pasting the JSON again, clicking save. In this tenant right now, the preview app unfortunately doesn't work, but it's a preview capability, so that's fine. I'm going to refresh the page, and we can actually see that we have this additional icon here, and if I click that icon, it will actually open up an email pointing to that person. So again, actionable additional things, behavior even added on the field without any actual customization. So nobody needs to develop explicitly something, which is quite cool. The final example here, which I wanted to quickly show, is the severity. For this one, there is one of the examples, out-of-the-box samples, which we provide. It was around the formatting, so text conditional format. This is quite actually complex and a long definition, but what it does is that it renders stuff based on the value. So it's not, even though it's quite long, but it's relatively understandable. So if it's done, then use that styling. If it's in progress, then use that styling. If it's in review, then use that styling. That's what it essentially is doing here. So let me actually copy this one. Boom. There we go. Let's copy that one, and let's go back on the list. It was in here. Modify that field and format this column. And paste that one in. Click save. Refresh the page, and voila, we have a custom rendering again on the page. So now in this case, that you need to, well, obviously in this case we're just adding that styling marker, in here based on the value. Obviously, we need to share what are the styles which are available. We need to increase the documentation and all of the options, all of the possible options for you in our documentation as well. We'll start the preview, like mentioned, quite soon. We absolutely welcome other people to do these contributions in a GitHub as well. So what we're looking to do essentially with this GitHub repo is that we would collect enough samples so people can learn from the samples and people can share their learnings between other people in here. The repo itself has a template, it has a guidance, so when you're actually submitting a sample, it is asking you to write the README file, it is asking you to provide a JSON file and then a screenshot file, and that would be what we're expecting for every single sample to have. So we have some level of a consistency when the samples are coming in. If you go to the samples folder, you can actually see that there's the sample naming is based on the type of the field, generic for those which are generic. If it's a date field or date configuration, it starts with the date. That's a numeric field, and that's a text field. Text field, the same, could be possible to be used also with choice field. But quite cool stuff, and maybe somebody might be thinking that, hey, okay, so what's with this one? So that looks like a field customizer in SharePoint framework. Well, there's a massive difference between the column formatting and the SharePoint framework field customizer. So the column formatting only applies in that particular column within this particular site or within this particular list. Yes, you can actually do this programmatically as well. So there is a column formatting property for the field object in the list level. So you can absolutely go and set that JSON blob as part of your provisioning if you're looking into doing that for the field, and then it will be available there. The second kind of key difference here comparing to the SharePoint framework field extensions is that this doesn't actually execute any code. So the field extensions, they can actually execute proper JavaScript in Angular, React, or whatever there is the chosen framework. In here, we're playing with styles. We're playing with predefined styles and stylings which we provide you. So there's no way for injecting scripts or executable JavaScript using the column formatting capability. But this is really kind of empowering also the citizen developers, and that's what we want to also do. We want to make sure that there's a lot of people who've been doing clever stuff in SharePoint in the past without actually writing too much code. And this is one of those things which is targeted for the, in quotes, citizen developers. They can still do rendering, they can still modify the rendering of the experience. What happens when I add the list view web part to the page? Will the column assume the formatting? Good question from Rodrigo. To be honest, I just tested that earlier today because I wasn't aware of is it already working on there. In this tenant, right now at least, the test, let me go to the test view. So you can actually see that there is a list view web part, and unfortunately the list view web part is not yet aware of the column rendering or the column formatting definitions. It will do that sooner or later because that's absolutely targeted to be there in the future. Maybe at some point you can define a column formatting even for editing experience. Who knows? Again, we're looking into collecting the feedback, looking into getting the input from the community as well. What else? But basically, if you are interested on this one, super soon we will go to first release. Please do remember in SharePoint we have SharePoint SPDev column formatting. In here we have samples available for you. If you need to have additional details, additional samples, please let us know. We're trying to figure out what kind of samples should be there. The example list, which I just showed, is actually visible in the front page of the GitHub as well. So you can easily build exactly the similar demo what I did today. So you can test around the functionality and give us feedback. Column formatting for editing would be great, but the field customizers for editing would be even better. Absolutely agree on that, Chris. Yes, on that one actually, that reminded me. So if I go second, So editing experience for the field customizers is not there, which is slightly disappointing. But there is a quite nicely growing user voice entry, which I would request people to actually vote, and so we would get more visibility on this one. We know that there's an ask and there's a demand for the field customizers for editing forms, and the reality of the life is that we do not have an infinite resources, even though we're Microsoft, so we need to prioritize our actions and tasks based on the demand. So more votes means more faster you'll get the functionality. So would freezing column headers come into this? That's actually a good point as well. Good question. On the freezing of column headers, so that the column headers would be able to be freezed and then you're able to scroll down. This isn't really around that. So this is more around the column formatting is specifically around the value presentation. So you can't actually play around with the column freezing. But it would actually make sense to have that as an optional thing, maybe on the rendering, where the column headers could be freezed if you have a lot of data, and then you are still able to scroll down in here. Good. Thanks, Chris, for the link. I should have actually pasted that one in. Good point. Good. Any other questions on this one? Ralph voted on that one already, so that's good. We're getting additional votes available. But relatively simple thing, and like mentioned, you can easily check from your first release tenant that whenever this format this column option is available. So it's this one in here. Whenever that's available within your tenant, that's when the functionality can be used. It will be there in a matter of days rather than weeks. So super soon. And please give us feedback also on the thinking and open sourcing these samples. Is that a good idea or bad idea? And if we need additional samples here and what kind of samples, that's all of the feedback is more than welcome. Cool. Let me flip back on the in the slides, and we can actually slightly start closing up for today. Leo had a good question around the column formatting applicable in the PnP XML. Answer is yes, it is actually there because the column formatting is part of the field schema, and the field schema from the classic WSS XSD is part of the PnP XML schema natively. So you're able to actually define the column formatting property for a field using the PnP provisioning engine. So absolutely doable. Plus there is a CSOM property for that one as well. I should have actually added that property, in this presentation, because last time when I talked about this one, there was exactly the same question. But if I remember correctly, it is actually field.custom column formatting or then custom format. It might be custom format, the property name, but the column formatting is the branding name for this capability. Good. Any other questions? Like mentioned, I do need to personally, I do have another call starting quite soon as well. So I need to actually slip slightly earlier today. But we do have Erwin in the call. I know that Paolo needs to flip pretty soon as well. And Bert is in the call if there's any question. Has anyone managed to provision quick links with web port with links on the modern site, if I remember correctly? So this is, I'm going to open up Mikael's, or this was Mikael's link, unable to provision a quick link modern web part with content. Yes. No. Now, the modern web part provisioning in the engine is slightly, how would I put it? It is problematic because many of the modern web parts, they assume that they are being placed on a site manually, and the properties are contextual, or they are context aware. So it's super difficult for us to actually set them dynamically, but we're looking into doing that potentially in the future. Together with engineering people, which is me as well, but we're kind of trying to figure out how to make this happen in the future from a remote provisioning perspective. Can you guys squeeze some more little time to work on the pull requests a bit more quickly, especially CSOM core? Yes, that's a fair quick comment, Gautam. We're trying to do that, absolutely. Totally off topic, theming of SPFX webpoint does not work on the classic pages anymore. That's Oliver. Yeah, I saw the issue. Is that a bug or is that gone forever? I think it's actually a bug. We need to address on that one. Thanks, Oliver, for opening up an issue on that one in the SP Dev Docs as well. See? I know that you reported that. It just takes a while for us to go through the processing.
Vesa, if I can jump in, when it comes Absolutely. To the processing pull requests, what maybe is interesting to know, what would greatly, I'm not saying that in this case this pull request is like that, but what would greatly help us in processing pull requests is if you make them as small as possible.
Yes.
If you create a pull request with 10 files, and sometimes you have to, I understand that, but if you create like 10 files that have been modified, it is really complex for us to see the overall, what are you trying to do or how are you doing it? And I still fully understand that sometimes it is simple as that. You have to modify so many files, but make them as atomic as possible. The smaller the PR, the easier it is for us to see the impact and to test it and to merge them.
Yeah.
That was just a thing I wanted to say.
Absolutely, absolutely. And comment on the Kota or Sirisha's question. Is there a modern page available in SharePoint 2016 on premises with the latest feature pack? Answer is no. SharePoint 2016 is still using the classic pages and classic experience. The SharePoint 2019, which is going to be available in mid next year, will have then the modern experiences in it. Good. I'm at least personally, unfortunately, running out of time. I need to flip on the things, but I know that Bert and Irvin might stay if there's any questions, if there's any things which we want to still talk about. Or if there isn't, we can absolutely close 10 minutes earlier today. But feel free to use time window if there's any questions still. And I know that Bert and Irvin can answer those, even though I would be dropping from the call. Or do we want to close up today early? Maybe we want to close up early. I don't see any questions coming in the window. We should make a resolution to make the testing story more solid. Yes, I absolutely agree on that. We need to make the testing story more solid for the SharePoint framework and for the web parts and unit testing and all of that as well. Absolutely agree on that. On the other topics, maybe just the teasers for next week. So next week, Thursday, on SharePoint Framework Special Interest Group, we're probably going to show some of the new upcoming stuff related on assets packaging and again, update on the ALM APIs, potentially site collection, app catalogs. So we're going to do a preview on those on next Thursday. So if you're interested on SharePoint Framework stuff and the latest and greatest on the modern experiences, drop by on next Thursday as well. But I think if we don't have more questions than this today, thank you everybody for joining. Thank you, Paolo, for helping on the demos. Paolo is already gone. Thank you everybody, and please join us on next week or on bi-weekly on the general development. And we'll have the video recording available in YouTube within 24 hours again. Thank you, and thank you, Irvin. Thank you, Bert, for helping on the questions and handling things. Thank you. Bye-bye.